Well, first of all, Happy New Year. And welcome to New Delhi. So I hope this is not the coldest winter you folks have encountered. Abhay told me that you wanted to chat about the Indian economy and state of the world and so on, and I thought it might be best to take that in Q&A. I did suggest a few pieces to read, etc., etc. I hope some of you have had a chance to go through that. But I'd love to talk about religion, how it affects our lives, and I'll take examples from around the world and how it is relevant to us in modern society, if I may. So, if you look at what Karl Marx said religion is the opium of the masses. In today's world, we sometimes see it in real life. You can see it in Indian popular press right now, you can see it in the polarization that is there around the world. But I would submit to you that religion could also be the protein of the masses. It gives you long-term strength, it gives you the ability to deal with the world, etc., etc. And let me show you how. Religion is meant to give us morality. It's meant to give us kindness. It's meant to give us community. But often it can be a source of dishonor. It can be a source of acrimony. And it can be a source of upheaval. If you mix religion with individuality, you get light. And I would submit, if you mix religion with politics, you risk getting a fire. And that's the difference on how we use religion as a tool for positive or negative aspects in our lives. The core philosophy of religion is the common thread of humanity. At the periphery, religions are shaped by their history, their place, their culture, and so on and so forth. And this is where differences lie. So if you look at Hinduism, Hinduism is an old agrarian religion. So its manifestations come from there. If you look at Islam, Islam is a religion of desert tribes. So many of its cultural manifestations come from there. If you look at Christianity and the way it evolved, it was a religion of the underprivileged. So lots of its cultural aspects come from there. And this is where the differences lie. They are difficult to reconcile sometimes. But the essence of all these religions, if you go beyond the surface, is kindness, reciprocity, faith, and I think they're overwhelmingly similar. Now, first question to ask is religion relevant at all in the modern day? I think the best answer to this actually was given by a Lebanese American thinker called Nassim Nicholas Taleb, whom you've probably heard of. He's based in New York. He teaches at NYU, he teaches at Oxford. He ran a small options trading and a hedge fund business. And if you haven't read his book, or his books, I would submit that you should actually read it. He talks about probability, decision theory, and stuff like that. He's not a philosopher by training. He's a mathematician by training. But I would encourage you to read his books, Fooled by Randomness. I would encourage you to read his book, Skin in the Game. So let me give you an example of what he says. If you look at the emerging markets boom from 2000 to 2010, people in emerging markets such as India thought, wow, where else will people go? Look at how well we are doing, because that were the facts of that decade. What emerging markets people did not realize at that time was, this was random. This was a commodities boom with a commodities cycle or a super cycle, which was leading to emerging markets boom. So a lot of it was shaped by short-term factors, which was cyclical. A lot of it was secular. But in our joy, we miss it, gets it. It evolves with the times, and so on and so forth. Which is why the mortality in the restaurant business is very high. But the Lindy's Cafe continues to prosper. Religion, he thinks, is one of the aspects in the modern world, which is subject to the Lindy's effect. The fact that it has survived thousands of years says there's something robust about what religion has to offer. Even though a rational mind may or may not be able to truly figure it out, there is something going on behind the scenes in the Lindy effect, where religion has stayed and continues to stay. On the other hand, religion has faced ambivalence forever. Every time period, if you go back into history and literature and so on and so forth, you'll see ambivalence. So, Amartya Sen is a Nobel laureate of Indian origin, economist, and he wrote a book called The Argumentative Indian. It has nothing to do with the television debates that you see in this day and age, but he talks about how Indians come from multiple backgrounds, multiple geographies, shaped by multiple forces, and how they've come together, how they differ, and so on. And I would encourage you to actually read that book if you haven't. It's called The Argumentative Indian. And he looks at the 2nd century BC period in the Argumentative Indian, and this was the golden period of Hinduism. This is when the Vedas were written, and so on and so forth. And when he looks at the literature, he finds that in that period, atheism and deism were very common. So let me define what these are. Atheism rejects God. It says there is no God. This is the peak of Hinduism. There's literature which is popular on atheism. Then he came to deism. What deism says is there is God, we just don't need organized religion to intermediate the relationship between man and God. These were very popular concepts at that time. As I was growing up, I discovered I was a cultural Hindu, but philosophically I was deist. There were parts of Greek Stoicism that I found very appealing. There were Protestant values that I found very appealing. There were elements of Jewish, Zen, and Islamic wisdom that I found very interesting. And I found myself growing up into a mix of this, which means I'm very confused. Let me talk to you about what I've learned from Hinduism, because that's been my maximum exposure, not because I think that's the best philosophy in the world, but because that I've had maximum exposure to, and I think it has lessons for all of us in the modern world. So one of the seminal texts of Hinduism is the Ramayana. The opening paragraph of the Ramayana is the essence of leadership. So in the opening paragraph, the sage Valmiki, who wrote the Ramayana, is asking a rhetorical question to the worldly Narad and saying, where does the perfect man exist? Okay, he describes this perfect man, okay, leadership. He should have heroic qualities. He should be well versed in the duties of life. He should be grateful. He should be truthful. He should be firm in his values. Of Hindu literature is the Gita. In the Gita, there's a god called Krishna. He defines dutiful action. And he says, don't be attached to actions and don't be motivated by results. All you control is your ability to do the best. You do not control the outcome. Any great company that has been built has not been built on a linear path. It's been built with ups and downs and so on and so forth. And therefore you have to survive that. Let's take the example of Google. Google was founded in 1998, as you all know. 3 years before the tech, 2 or 3 years before the tech bust up, which started in 2000, peaked in 2001. The first product, as some of you may remember, was called Background. Nobody knows it today. It raised $1 million from Jeff Bezos and a bunch of other people, including a friend of mine called Ram Shriram, who actually sat on the board of Google in the early days. It couldn't get B2C traction, or didn't have the courage to get B2C traction. So it ended up becoming a back-end search engine to Yahoo. Big mistake on Yahoo's part. Okay. Today, its market cap, 31st of December, was $922 billion. Google didn't go up like a rocket. It went through its ups and downs, through the debacle of the 2000 tech buster, and so on and so forth. And you need a lot of these Krishna-like qualities. You can take an example from sport. So you heard of Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan is 56 years old now. His net worth is $1.9 billion. One of the greatest sportsmen in the history of the United States. He seemed to have studied the Gita. So he says, I'm quoting him, I've missed more than 9,000 shots. This is Michael Jordan saying it himself. I've lost 300 games. I've missed the winning shot 26 times. I've failed over and over again. And that's why I've succeeded. Because he had the courage to continue. He was not overwhelmed by failures and minor setbacks as a part of his winning streak. Look at those statistics. They are daunting. And that's what you have to rise above if you want to create a goal. Some of you may have heard of a man called Arthur Schopenhauer. He was a philosopher, a German philosopher, in the 1800s, early to mid 1800s. He was one of the most respected German philosophers before World War I. He was amongst the first Western thinkers to affirm the tenets of Eastern philosophy. He called the Upanishads, which were Indian sacred texts, the highest human wisdom. The Upanishads are 200 or so texts written by various people, so there's no one author. Written, a lot of women contributed to it, a lot of feminist views in it. And it was written in the 6th, 7th century BC. It's been translated into more than 15 languages. My favorite quote from the Upanishads, and I quote this all the time to people in business, is, you are what your deep driving desire is. As your desire is, so is your will. As your will is, so is your deed. As your deed is, so is your destiny. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a champion of the 19th century transcendentalism movement in the United States, said something similar. He said, shallow men believe in luck. Strong men believe in cause and effect. Let's assume you're interviewing, you've got a startup and you're interviewing at Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the hottest VC firms in Silicon Valley, to raise capital. Market sizes are not clear. Competition is uncertain. There are incumbents. You're the disruptor. They bet on management teams. And this innate quality, what they call passion, your deep driving desire, is actually what they bet on. To be a successful entrepreneur today, you require this Upanishad type quality. You require an Emerson type quality. Let me come to something you may have encountered earlier. Meditation. Now, meditation is synonymous with Eastern religious traditions. You've seen it. The first evidence of meditation in history is from the wall art of 5000 BC in India, Indian cave paintings. Tim Ryan, some of you may remember, was a presidential candidate for the next election in the US, Democrat. He's written a book called Mindful Nation, which is on mindfulness, meditation, and so on and so forth. He says that meditation helps him balance emotion and rationality. He leads a movement called the Quiet Time Caucus, which he started in 2012. And they do weekly 30 minutes meditation programs for members of the Congress. He was a high school football quarterback, not someone likely to do meditation. Right? But he got into meditation because it helps him. The story of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs had a Syrian father whom he never saw. He had an American mother. They were never married. After he was born, he was given up for adoption. The family that was to adopt him changed their mind. He was then adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, which is where he got his name from, Steve Jobs. His biological mother was very anti this family for this couple adopting her son because they were poor. And she took a oath from them that they would send him to college. That's all she wanted. This is the man who became Steve Jobs, a child whose mother gives him up for adoption and asks the family that is ultimately adopting him that all she wants is that he should get to college and get a decent life. He went to Reed College in Oregon, worked at Atari, shows up in India in 1974. 2 years before he starts Apple. Gets sucked into Indian philosophy, meditation, and this, that, and the other. In 1978, 2 years after starting Apple, his net worth was $1 million. So he was one of the youngest, hottest tech entrepreneurs in the late 70s. By 1980, his net worth had moved to $250 million. In 1980 dollars, that was a very big number. He was the youngest member of the Forbes billionaire list. Forbes list of the 400 richest people in the US before he became a billionaire. In 1985, he was ousted after Apple II failed. So he goes out of Apple. In 1986, he forms what is called Pixar, which is a spin-out. In 10 years later, in 1996, Apple buys his company called Next, and he becomes CEO in 1997. Leaves in early 2011 on medical leave and dies later that year, as we know. Apple, during his time, comes up with the iMac, iTunes, iPod, everything. So the serial innovation that Apple did during his tenure and new killer categories that were created is almost unprecedented. During his tenure, Apple went from a market cap of $3 billion to $347 billion during his tenure, second tenure. He claimed that meditation made him creative, improved his intuition, improved his insight into consumer markets. Just simple Indian meditation. Changing topics, Hinduism differentiates between acts and actors. So no matter what Trump does, forgive him. Acts and actors. So in the Ramayana, which I referred to earlier, Ram is sent to the forest because his stepmother thinks there's a succession problem and she wants her son to take over. So he's banished into the forest for 12 years. While he's in the forest, his wife is kidnapped by Ravan. Legend has it, he forms an army of monkeys, attacks Ravan to free his wife. Frees his wife. So now we're in the death scene of Ravan at the end of that war. Ravan is dying on the battlefield. Ram tells his younger brother Lakshman, who's helping him, go to Ravan, he's a wise man, and imbibe some wisdom. And by the way, when you're doing that, go stand by his feet. Because true seeker has to go stand by his feet. He's our enemy and that's fine. This is the mark of respect and humility. Let me bring you to the modern time. There is a columnist for New York Times called David Brooks, and you might have read his op-eds in the New York Times. He wrote a phenomenally good book called The Road to Character. And he speaks in the aftermath of World War II, the radio broadcasts that were happening in the United States. And those radio broadcasts were not chest thumping, we won World War II type of radio broadcasts. They were radio broadcasts of thinking, reminiscing of what went wrong in the world. Why did we even have to have World War II? Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, similar narrative. So you have to distinguish between acts and actors. In the Hindu pantheon, we have millions of gods. They are all shapes and sizes, all types of things. But there are two iconic gods, Rama, I was just referring to, and Krishna that I also referred to. They stand out in the pantheon. They're also opposites. So let me talk about Ram for a second. Ram followed protocol. He fought a war to get back his abducted wife. He gives up his wife in the face of public opinion because his role as a king demanded that, just after fighting the war. He was a man of protocol. Krishna, on the other hand, reincarnation of the same god, so these are reincarnations of Vishnu, was a breaker of rules. He looked at the world in shades of grey. He encouraged his cousins to go into a war with other cousins because of a dispute. Because it was an interfamily dispute, he said, I will side with this part, who requested me to side with them, but my army will side with the opposite side. It's bizarre. Okay. He was a breaker of rules. Rama was a follower of rules. They are the top two Indian gods in any reference that you can get. Hinduism gives you a sense of agency. You can choose. Do you want to be Ram? Do you want to be Krishna? Sometimes you may want to be Ram. Sometimes you may want to be Krishna. There's a caveat though. Ram came a few centuries before Krishna. So my personal takeaway from this is you must first follow the rules. Test them so that you can selectively break them. My son disagrees, but that's the way I would submit is my takeaway from this. Let me again bring this to the modern world. Steve Schwarzman, as you know, founded Blackstone in 1985. So let me give you his story. He was at Harvard Business School and he didn't like it. He wanted to drop out. Before going to Harvard, he had worked for DLJ, which was a hot investment bank in the 70s. So he wrote to Richard Jenrette, who was one of the founders of DLJ, for whom he had worked, saying he wanted to drop out of business school. And Richard Jenrette encouraged him to carry on and follow the rule book and not drop out. So he stayed, graduated. It was a very Rama-like worldview. He works at Lehman Brothers, etc., etc., and then he starts Blackstone. When he starts Blackstone, private equity is quite a nascent industry. It's not a mainstream industry on Wall Street. First fund they go out to raise, $1 billion. Audacious, no one's done that before, very Krishna-like. All success stories that I've seen have Rama and Krishna moments. So you've got to pick your Rama moment and your Krishna moment. My takeaway from Hinduism, actually from any school of religious thought, is that all profound truths are paradoxical. All good things become bad beyond a point. Whether you take economic policy or political points of view, all isms, communism, capitalism, any ism, is a very narrow definition of the world. Dogmas are dangerous. The Enlightenment tradition of skepticism, which should not be confused with the modern day version of cynicism, is actually a good thing. Skepticism is a good thing. If we want to create a better world, we have to transcend these superficial differences, which are the cultural manifestations of religion. And we have to embrace the deep commonalities all of us have. Because that's where I believe, being a deist, the metaphorical God resides. So thank you.